What is going on, everyone? Anthony here, and welcome back to another video here on Let's Talk Resident Evil. And in today's video, I wanted to bring up an interesting discussion piece, and that is video game remakes. Are we still getting remakes that we are satisfied with? Are we going to hit a wall? Are we already hitting a remake fatigue? Are we running out of original ideas? Well, let's discuss, because obviously I want to hear your opinions down below, and I will share my thoughts as well. I don't necessarily think that I'm hitting a remake fatigue, especially when I'm enjoying all the Resident Evil remakes that we are getting as far as on the Resident Evil side. I haven't played every single remake in recent years under the sun, so I can only really speak for the franchises that I'm close to. But we've been getting Resident Evil remakes, Final Fantasy remakes, and now Silent Hill remakes. Max Payne 1 and 2 are getting remade. It's a industry that obviously relies on printing money, whether it's Hollywood or games, and it's the same thing where Hollywood likes to remake, reboot stuff. Same thing with the gaming industry. It does print money. It is safe to remake titles, especially when you know they have a classic kind of following and also just are really held closely to the fans' hearts, because a lot of people are very offended just by thinking of remaking their favorite titles, until sometimes when it actually comes out and fans give it a chance and they play it, they say, you know what, I really enjoy that. I think remakes are great for people to get into a franchise, because I don't really gatekeep here. I don't gatekeep Resident Evil fans and say, oh, you can't get into the franchise because you got into Resident Evil 2 Remake and everything else. No, if people got into a certain, entry point, whether it's a gateway to the other titles, that's great. That's what you want. You want new fans. And I never think that fans, are any different because they got in from a remake or a mainline game that's more recent. We don't gatekeep here on LTRE, especially with the Resident Evil titles. Now, remakes are definitely a moneymaker, right? So the industry is going to shift in that way. I think eventually, though, we will have a wall that we hit when you remake all the classics from all these franchises and the games that we know and love from growing up, the games that we cherish, the games that we played over and over again on our CRTs, the games that we shared with our family, our friends, the games that we rented from video stores back in the day. We rented for the weekend and we couldn't wait to come home and play it, Those memories are cherished forever. And a lot of people have those tight nostalgia feelings with said game. So it is hard sometimes to see some of these games remade, and a lot of fans have a lot of questions. They don't know how well it's going to do, or if it's going to, cover all the bases, so to speak. And I will say for most of the Resident Evil remakes, give or take some that, cut out content, didn't completely tell the narrative 100% how we did in the original. There is many instances where even with the amazing remakes we've gotten, I still prefer the originals over the remakes, but that doesn't mean I will never play the remakes, never go back and play the old ones. I play them all, the originals and the remakes, and some fans getting into it will just play the newer games because they are modernized. And when I say modernized, I mean camera angles, controls, things to make it easier for people to jump in, and it doesn't really feel so late 90s, early 2000s with some of the mechanics or the technical limitations that we have. So I think as developers are starting to, get all of these bases covered as far as all of these classic games, will we eventually hit a wall of no more classic games to remake? Yeah, I think eventually we will. So that is inevitable. Now, have I hit that wall personally? Have developers hit that wall? No, we are still remaking stuff from an era where, there's a lot of games that can be remade, from all the way from Final Fantasy to, like I said, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Max Payne, all these classic titles that are, cherished amongst many of us. Metal Gear Solid, for example, the third one is getting remade, right? So a lot of these games are able to be remade, and it kind of scratches that itch for not only the fans to replay this stuff again, but newer fans that maybe just missed the mark, or maybe they weren't into that type of game back then, so now they're just getting into it. So I think all of these improvements and stuff that the remakes can have are fantastic. But also, if you're not a fan of that, the originals are always there on the shelf. I mean, I'm looking at Resident Evil on the shelf right now, Silent Hill. It's always there to go back and play. So it's not like they're taking anything away from the fans, and you can still vote with your wallet. There's nothing wrong with voting with your wallet. Take Dead Space Remake, for example. I love Dead Space Remake. I streamed it. I talked highly about it, and I love the original as well, but a lot of fans didn't end up buying that game, and it reflects in the sales of EA. And guess what? We might not get a Dead Space 2 remake now, and who knows what's going to happen with that franchise. So clearly that is an instance of fans voting with their wallets. Maybe it was the timing, who knows, of why it didn't sell, but there is nothing wrong with that. It's just sometimes they will not make any more remakes because of it. So there is examples of remakes not really hitting the mark. Now, on the other side of that coin, do we still need new and original ideas, or the franchise that's getting all of these remakes, do we still need a continuation with the mainline of the series, right? So, for example, Resident Evil still does mainline games along with the remakes. And obviously, yes, I think those new ideas still have to be there. Now, in a case with Resident Evil, there are cases of, you know, the mainline games not being as strong as some of the recent remakes, and I would say this is the case, in my opinion, for Village, where I felt like the writing and the story and the characters were not as strong, so the mainline games have some work to do, in my opinion. And sometimes the remakes can gauge the developer as to what the fans and audience are currently liking within that franchise. So it also helps out in that regard. But I still think on the other side of that coin, we still need new IPs and new ideas. I think the gaming industry is definitely suffering on this one, where a lot of fans are spending money on some of these new games, new IPs, $75, sometimes $120, $130 on these editions, and the games are broken. They don't get released in a complete form, and they have to get patched later on. And this is like almost 9 times out of 10 with some of these games that come out. And yeah, sometimes they fix them, but it's really hard to find a classic title that would even be worth remaking that has come out in the last 5 to 10 years. You know, there's been a few instances of classic titles. I know this is over a decade old at this point, so it's cheating, but Last of Us is an example of a great game that's come out in the last decade, right, or over the last decade. And something like even Elden Ring, which is a smash hit amongst fans, right? And that's a game that, again, was released complete. There wasn't a bunch of stuff that they had to, you know, patch out or fix. Obviously, I'm sure there's been, you know, some updates since then, but again, there are still instances of some games coming out where it's actually worth the player's time and money day one. But how many games can we say that for in the past decade? You know, it's really hard, and that's few and far between, and it sucks. So I think gaming being where it's at, in a very weird spot where we don't have a lot of these titles coming out and they're knocking it out of the park or being as memorable as we once had them in the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, right? When things just felt a little bit more normal and games were coming out and you got your money's worth. That's less and less of the case, unfortunately. So I think within having new ideas and these developers coming up with new stuff that isn't in existing franchises, we still need that. We still need a healthy balance, whether it's multiplayer, live service, single player, whatever games you're into. Obviously, the majority of people nowadays play your multiplayer games, your Fortnites, your Call of Duties, your Warzones. Like, that is the reality, right? I'm still into single player games. You're probably still into single player games if you're watching this. Or both, or you just like it all. I'm the same way. I kind of like it all, right? I'm not just one and done, or that's the only type of genre I like playing. I also don't just play survival horror, even though that's what I only play on this channel. But you get what I'm saying, is that we definitely need a balance. So I think remakes are, you know, essential, I think, for some of these titles that are a little bit older and dated and definitely need room for improvement. But I also don't think that should be the only thing that we get for the next decade, let's say. When it comes to the ratio of new games and remakes, I think we need a little bit more of a balance, because eventually the remakes will hit a wall eventually. I'm not saying I hit a wall with remakes or the developers already ran out of classic titles to remake, but it will happen eventually. So they have to keep their eyes on what makes money, what prints money. Yes, remaking an existing game that is already there is guaranteed a paycheck at the end of the day, as long as it sells well, it's marketed well, and it's fulfilling to the fans. But then again, on the same token, you need to figure out how you can come up with new IPs and innovative ideas to keep some of these franchises going, keep them alive, but also build new brands and new IPs. So I think it's a balance of both. And I'm not fatigued on remakes, but I think some fans are very quick to jump the shark when it comes to having an opinion on some of these remakes. And it's not even just about Silent Hill 2 remake. It's just about remakes in general, because I've always seen this on the Resident Evil side of things, disregarding all of the other remakes, right? I think there needs to be an understanding from the fans that, you know, if the remake comes out, it's not erasing the original game. It's still on the shelf. You can still play it, right? And if you don't like what you see, just vote with your wallet and don't buy it, because like I said, even with Dead Space, clearly that worked, right? And same thing with Silent Hill, same thing with Metal Gear Solid. I mean, if it's really not doing it for you, don't buy it. And they will listen, and they probably won't make more remakes after that. So sometimes the fans will get what they wish, right? Or not. Sometimes fans will buy a remake and they don't even realize that it doesn't really sell well, which is the case for Dead Space Remake, where I really enjoyed it, but that's the most recent example that I can bring up where this is relevant. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this topic. Are you getting tired of remakes? Do you think there's still plenty of more remakes that need to be done? Clearly, there's plenty of more remakes that need to be done. A bunch of Resident Evil titles can be remade, Silent Hill titles, Final Fantasy titles, you name it, right? Like, the franchise, the list goes on. But we still need a balance of new ideas and fresh ideas. So I'm curious to hear what you think about that as well. So let me know down in the comments how you feel about the current state of gaming with the remakes and the new ideas and new mainline game ratio. Do you think it's too much? Or are you getting fatigued? I'm definitely not so far. There's plenty of more remakes that I would like to see, especially if they're done right. So let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos on Let's Talk Resident Evil.